Hey guys, so you want to learn photography or you want to buy your first camera, and you probably looked up tutorials and they might have told you things like use the rule of thirds or shoot during golden hour, but sometimes that's just not enough. In the world where everyone's taking and sharing photos of literally everything every single second, that's not enough to make your photos stand out. So I put together these 5 overly simplified tips that you can use to improve your photography. I say oversimplified because obviously you're not going to become a professional photographer just by watching this one video, but just like anything in life, you need to practice, you need to use your camera, you need to take more photos. But if you feel overwhelmed, confused, you don't know what to buy, you don't know where to start, I think this video might be able to help you a little bit. Step number 1, buy a used, cheap, full frame camera. You know, my friends always ask me, how do I take better photos? And I tell them, just buy an expensive camera. And they laugh, but I'm actually only half joking. You know, people say gears don't really matter. It's the photographer, not the camera, and it doesn't really matter what gears we use. But if it really doesn't matter what we use, then might as well use something that's built better, will last longer, and will automatically take better photos. And I say that now because used full frame cameras nowadays are very affordable. To buy a full frame camera brand new, you would have to spend anywhere between like $1,500 to infinity. But today you can buy great cameras like the Canon 5D Mark I, 5D Mark II, the original 60 for like less than $600 or $700. This, for example, is the Canon 5D Mark I, and this is a professional camera that came out about 13 years ago, used by millions and millions of professional photographers around the world, still being used by some people today. And this was over $3,000 when it first came out. I just bought this from Amazon a few months ago for less than $300. Buying a camera body is like buying a car. They depreciate in value very, very quickly. And what a lot of people do when they first get into photography is they go to like a local electronics store and they buy a cheap entry-level DSLR with a cheap entry-level kit lens. And they play around with it for a while. They even take it on a vacation, and then they realize, oh, the photos are not that different from the ones from my cell phone. So like, why am I carrying around this extra gear like with all the extra lenses and chargers and batteries? So then after a while, they get left behind on their trips, and then they get put in the closet and soon be forgotten. Sounds familiar? I won't go into too much details in this video about the differences between full frame and APS-C and Micro Four Thirds and whatever smaller cameras there are, but there are a few benefits of using a full frame camera. With a much bigger sensor, you'll be able to take better photos in low light situations, although photos will generally come out with less grain and less noise, therefore generally a sharper photo. And also you're gonna get a much better background blur. This is what all the photographers die for. You know, the portrait mode on the iPhone are fun and all, but it's nothing like the real deal. You know, this alone won't make a bad photo good, but once you get it right, like, you'll just want more and more and more. Step number 2, buy 1 or 2 good prime lenses. You know, some people say that photography is a much more expensive hobby than cocaine, but then I guess that depends on how much you spend on cocaine. But anyway, who am I to judge? But again, I'm not asking you to spend thousands and thousands of dollars, but lenses, unlike camera bodies, hold their values much better. I bought and sold dozens and dozens of lenses over the years, and the ones that I bought used, I have usually sold them at the same value that I bought them at, or sometimes even more. But to start, I suggest buying maybe 1 or 2 good prime lenses at the focal length that you'll be using most frequently. You know, 35 millimeters is a most commonly used one. 50 millimeters is great for street photography and portraits. If you're not sure about the focal length, think of it this way. If you have an iPhone, or like an iPhone 7 Plus or the 8 Plus or 10, your phone has a wide angle lens and the portrait lens. The wide angle lens on your phone is the 28 millimeter equivalent. And if you like that focal length, it's great for like landscapes and some group portraits. You can buy the Canon 28 millimeter f1.8. If that's too wide, you can go with the 35. And the portrait lens is about 56 millimeter equivalent. For that, I suggest getting the Canon 50 millimeter 1.8 STM. Make sure you get the STM version because that's the newest one. I realized I'm only talking about Canon cameras and lenses here. If you're a beginner and you're on a budget, I would usually recommend going with Canon because Canon cameras and lenses tend to be usually much cheaper than the Sony or Nikon equivalents. But that's a whole nother topic, so if you have any more questions about buying cameras and lenses, just let me know in the comments. Step 3, put it in M. Once you get your camera, you see this mode dial here? Put it in M and never take it out. In case you didn't know, M stands for manual. It might be a little scary and confusing to start, but it's really not that hard. I told you this video alone won't make you a professional photographer, but you need to practice. The best way to learn something is to actually do it. You only really have to worry about three things: the aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. You see, your camera is not that smart, no matter how expensive it is. You have to tell it exactly what you want to do to get the exact result that you want. If you want more background blur, open up that aperture all the way. Aperture mainly does two things. Bigger aperture gains more light, so it'll make your photos brighter. And it'll give you a shallower depth of field, so it'll give you more background blur. Smaller aperture will obviously make the image darker, and it'll focus on a wider range of areas, so it'll give you less background blur. Just remember that lower aperture number means bigger aperture, and higher aperture number means smaller aperture. Shutter speed is pretty self-explanatory. Shutter speed indicates the amount of time that the shutter stays open for the sensor to gather information, basically getting that impression of the photo. If it stays open longer, it'll gather more light, so it'll make your images brighter. If it stays open shorter, it will gather less light, so it'll make your image darker. Not only that, but you can also use the faster shutter speed to freeze the movement of a moving subject, or you can slow down your shutter speed to give your photos more movement. And lastly, ISO is kind of like an amplifier for light. Higher ISO basically means your camera sensor will be more sensitive to light, meaning it will gather more light and make your images brighter. So for example, you want to take a photo of a fast moving subject, so you want to use a faster shutter speed, but that's going to make your image darker, so you increase your ISO to balance it out. The downside of using higher ISO, because your camera is so sensitive to light, it will generate more noise in your images. Remember those times when you try to take a picture with your cell phone in a dark environment and everything comes out grainy and purple? That's happening because of high ISO. So whenever it's sunny and you have enough lights, just try to use the lowest ISO possible to get the best results. Step 4. Take your camera everywhere. As I said, to learn something, you have to do something. Back in college, in my illustration class, my teacher told me that you need 5,000 hours of practice in order to build up muscle memory. If you want to learn how to draw, you should draw. If you want to learn how to take photos, you should take photos. If you want to learn a musical instrument, you should try to play the musical instrument. It's like driving. The first time you tried it, it might have been hard, but after a while, you won't even be thinking about it. You know, just take photos of everything: your family, your dog, some flowers on the street, trees, birds, anything you see. And if the photo looks bad, try it again or move on to find something else. Don't worry too much about the results and just have fun. Even try to intentionally take bad photos. The point is to become really comfortable with your camera so you can get the results that you want whenever you want. Step 5. Observe, reproduce, and repeat. How do people learn musical instruments? They learn by playing the songs that they like. How do people learn how to draw? They learn by drawing things that they see. You don't just try to create a masterpiece the first time you try something. Find some photos that you like, either on Instagram or by some famous photographers, and try to copy them. You know, look at a photo and think about what was the shutter speed, what was the ISO, what was the aperture, you know, how did they get that movement, how did they get that background blur, where and what was the source of light here. Like I said in the last step, once you become really familiar with your camera and your camera settings, when you look at a photograph, you should be able to tell these things very easily. Also, try to learn some post-processing softwares like Lightroom and Photoshop. Learning these softwares is a topic for a whole nother video, but even some simple color correction or refining the exposure can really make good photos great, and that's definitely a cheap and quick way to improve your photos. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching. Let me know if you have any questions down below, and please subscribe. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.